Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous video, we looked into a little more detail the roles of the data files and the transactional log files. And I went into a little more detail in what a transactional file is doing in the behind the scenes when a simple transaction such as a withdrawal of $100 from the ATM, as an example. And I also demonstrated with some detail as to what happens to the transactional log files as it's been recording all the modifications to the database. And this comes now to the question of what is the recovery model. So let's look at some of the recovery models and their roles. The recovery model in SQL are as follows. It's a simple mode, full mode, or bulk load mode. And these determine whether a transactional log file can be backed up or not. So let me illustrate that again. So when we change look at the recovery models of each database, and each database has its own recovery mode or model, it determines whether a transactional log backup is available or not. And as I mentioned, that the primary purpose of a transaction log is to record all modifications to the database. And in the previous video, when I was showing you how the transaction log is recording all that, I also pointed out that after the committed transactions, the log file continues to grow and grow with each transactions, and this causes a problem because the transactional log file will consume the physical drive it's on if we don't clear the inactive portion. So now we come to the recovery models, which allow us to clear that transactional log file. So as I said, there are three: simple, bulk, and bulk load. So let's look at them individually. So with simple recovery model, well, let me go over here first and go over the SQL. And I'm going to just create a database, create database admin. I'm going to go over here and refresh it. And now I'm going to right click. I'm going to go right click, properties. One thing you'll start noticing is that not only am I going to be using T-SQL, which is a requisite for this course, and I encourage you certainly to take my first course, which is free, because you're going to need this to understand all the T-SQL that we're going to be executing in the coming videos. So as I mentioned, now if you go to files here, you'll see the two transactional log two files that are created, the data file and the log file. But one thing you'll also notice if you go to options is the recovery model. Right now, the recovery model for this database is full. As I said, each database has its own recovery model. So if I have another database, that can be in the simple mode, that can be in the bulk log mode, or full mode. This happens to be in a full mode. So if I click here, cancel here, and let's bring that up. Now that was doing it to the right click using the GUI properties. You can also look at the recovery model by using this syntax here. It's from the assist databases, and again, I provide all my syntax for you, so make it learn easier. So in this particular case, select name database property recovery as recovery mode from assist databases. And now I'm going to exclude the system databases, but if you want to see those also, just as I said, just comment them out. So I'm going to highlight this, execute this. Now you'll notice here that the recovery model for administration that we made is full. Now remember, the recovery mode again is based on the template of the model database, which is in the system database right here. And again, we discussed that at length also. Now I'm going to, for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to change the admin database from full to simple using the syntax right here. So if you want to change the recovery model to simple or to full or to bulk log, then you can do it, as I said, from right click properties, or you can do it using this syntax. So here I'm going to change, remember it's full, I'm going to change it to simple. And again, I'm just going to highlight this and execute. The command is alter database name, set recovery to whichever mode you want, in this case simple. And now if I look at that database again, you'll notice it's simple. Then it was full. So I'm going to change it back to full. And again, it's not very much different. The only thing I'm changing is from simple to full. And obviously you'll notice that I'm going relatively fast and I'm not discussing syntax here because as I mentioned, I've already discussed this in my first course and I highly recommend you take that course. So now if I go back here, it should be full properties, options, and full again. So great. So now you understand what the recovery models types are. Let's look at them in more detail. So if the recovery model is in a simple recovery mode, what does that mean? Well, transactional log backups are not supported. So if you set your database to simple mode, then you cannot take transactional log backups. They are not supported in this mode. Truncation of the transactional log is done automatically, thereby releasing space to the system. And what I mean by that is if your database is in simple mode, you do not need to take transactional log backups to clear your inactive portions of your transactional log file. It will be done automatically for you. That's what it's saying. One caveat thing is obviously that since you don't have transactional log backup of your transactional log file, you can lose data as there is no transactional log backups. One thing I want to point out is that it was a little confusing for me, so let me just illustrate this. There is a distinction between the transactional log file when the database is created and the transactional log file backup, which is a copy of your transactional log file. So have that clear distinction in your mind, that when we talk about transactional log file, it is the actual file created where all the transaction and modifications are happening. And when we speak of transactional log backup, we're talking about a separate file than the transactional log. And that is a copy of your transactional log. So I think I've illustrated that. So when the recovery mode is in simple, data in the transactional log will not grow. It does not grow because while you're in the simple mode, a checkpoint occurs. A checkpoint in fundamentally says to the transactional log file, hey, if you've committed these transactions, then I'm going to automatically move them as active and push them to the data file. It does it automatically for you. So there's no need to take transactional log files. And as a result, your transactional log file in your physical disk will not grow beyond what you've assigned. But one thing to note, obviously, is you do not have simple recovery modes in a production database. Let me repeat that because it's important. While it's easier to manage, we do not recommend having production databases in simple mode. So what is bulk log recovery model? Well, bulk log model is similar to full in that it supports transactional log backups, meaning you can do transactional log backups of your transactional log file. As in full mode, there are no automated processes of truncating the log. And what I mean by that is that if you have your recovery model mode as bulk log and you're not taking transactional log backups, then your file will continually grow until it consumes the space if you don't take a transaction log backup. Used primarily for bulk operations such as bulk insert, thereby minimally recording it. So now we come to the most prominent model that we're going to be using in a production-based database environment, and that is full recovery model. Full recovery model supports transactional log backups, meaning if you've got your database in full recovery model, then you can take transactional log backups of your transactional file. And at the same time, when you do that, it will clear the inactive portion of your transactional file, thereby controlling it. It's the little chance of data loss under these circumstances, because as I mentioned, and I will illustrate this with demonstrations, that when you take a full database backup, it records everything up to that point. When you take transactional log backups, it takes snapshots of everything that's changed since the last full backup. And I'm going to be going into that in a little more detail when we talk about backups. But for now, just understand that it supports transactional log backups. Just as in bulk log, there is no automated way to truncate the log, meaning there is no means to clear the transactional log. It has to be done manually. The transactional log file must be made regularly to mark unused space available for overwriting. So that's what a transactional log file backup does. It marks them, says, hey, I'm going to take a backup of the transaction log file, and anything that's inactive, push it out and bring it to me. And that's what that means. When using full recovery mode, the transaction log can get large in size. So as if you've got it in full and you're not taking transaction log backups, then the file can get big and very large and can consume space. So that's something we need to be mindful of, and I'll be demonstrating that to you. During most backup processes, these changes contained in the log file are sent to the backup file. So this is what's happening when you're taking a transactional log backup of your transactional log. And again, I'll be discussing this more when we talk about backups. So again, I've already illustrated some of the recovery models and the syntaxes for using it. And this just illustrates that, which we just mentioned. So I think I'm going to leave this video here, and just to reiterate, there are 3 recovery models: simple, full, bulk. With simple, transactional logs are not supported. Data loss can be great. The transactional log file will not grow because it's cleared or truncated for you automatically. Same thing as with bulk and full. These are probably somewhat similar in that transactional log files are supported in each of them. There's little chance of data loss in full recovery mode as you're taking transactional log backups. And in both bulk and full, there is no automated way to truncate or clear the log. It must be done manually by taking transactional log files. And the transactional log file says basically this: hey, during the most backup, the changes contained in the log files are sent to the backup file. And again, I'll be discussing that more in depth when we talk about backups. So again, I think I'm going to leave it here, and we'll start talking about some of the demonstrations here in the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator.